The Lost Tribes of Israel, Volume 3, Jeremiah's Journey. The decades following the collapse of the Assyrian Empire were filled with rebellions, political intrigues, and great battles. Petty kingdoms and city-states seized the moment to declare their independence. But freedom would prove to be temporary, because Babylonians and Medes decided to split the fallen empire between them. Using the Tigris River as the dividing line, the Medo-Babylonian Treaty granted all kingdoms and city-states south and west of the Tigris to the Babylonians. This region included Egypt and the house of Judah, placing at risk the perpetual throne the Lord promised to King David. Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt, 609 through 595 BC, quickly marched north to confront the Babylonians. Some historians believe his military campaign in 609 BC was an attempt to restore to power the remaining Assyrian forces along the Euphrates. An Egyptian victory would have given Necho control of Palestine. A win would have given Egypt all the land assigned to the Babylonians. In order to reach the Euphrates, the Egyptian army had to pass through the kingdom of Judah. According to the Bible, King Josiah of Judah, 640 through 609 BC, tried to prevent their passage. 2 Chronicles chapter 35 verses 20 through 24. About halfway between the capital of Jerusalem and the city of Tyre, the Jews fought Pharaoh's forces in the valley of Megiddo. During the battle, King Josiah suffered a mortal wound. We read, "And his servants carried him in a chariot dead from Megiddo, and brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own sepulchre. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz the son of Josiah, and anointed him, and made him king in his father's stead." Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. 2 Kings chapter 23 verses 30 through 31. One line of research holds that Jeremiah of Libnah and the prophet Jeremiah of Anathoth were the same man. Therefore, when Josiah married Hamutal, his second wife, Jeremiah became the king's father-in-law. This relationship explains why the prophet deeply mourned Josiah's death. 2 Chronicles chapter 35 verse 25. The new king, Jehoahaz, was Jeremiah's grandson. 3 months after the fighting in the valley of Megiddo, and after the Egyptian army moved into Syria, Pharaoh Necho arrested Jehoahaz. The Judean king was taken to Riblah and placed in bands. Necho also imposed a heavy tribute on the house of Judah. Then we read, "And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there." 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 34. In 605 BC, the Egyptian and Babylonian armies fought along the Euphrates at Carchemish. General Nebuchadnezzar, crown prince of Babylon, was victorious. Any dreams Egypt had of extending her dominance came to an end. Pharaoh Necho and his beaten soldiers, including Greek mercenaries, were forced out of Syria. While the Egyptians returned home to regroup, Nebuchadnezzar hurried back to Babylon on news that his father had died. A Babylonian text records that in his first year as king, 604 and 603 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's armies began a campaign in Palestine. His ultimate goal was to conquer Egypt. The Bible indicates that Jehoiakim of Judah became his vassal for 3 years. 2 Kings chapter 24 verse 1. In 601 through 600 BC, Nebuchadnezzar attacked the Egyptians. Pharaoh Necho managed to stop the invasion, and the Babylonians spent the next year building chariots to repair their losses. This temporary halt in Nebuchadnezzar's plans provided Jehoiakim with a false sense of achieving independence. Jehoiakim rebelled. The vassal nations of Syria, Moab, and Ammon were ordered to fight the Judeans, their longtime enemy, until Nebuchadnezzar could muster a fresh army to deal with them. 2 Kings chapter 24 verse 2. Near the end of the rebellion, Jehoiakim died. His son, Jehoiakim, became king, reigned for 3 months, then surrendered Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonian Chronicle dates the end of Jerusalem's siege to March 16, 597 BC. The victors stripped the Temple of Solomon and the royal palace of their precious metals and treasures. Certain artifacts, such as the Ark of the Covenant, had been safely hidden. Jehoiakim, his mother and wives, all his princes, officers, and mighty men, and all the craftsmen were carried off to Babylon. 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 12 through 16. Cuneiform tablets recovered in Babylon confirm this deportation of the ruling class. And as Jeremiah once predicted, Jehoiakim's line would never rule from David's throne in Judah. Jeremiah chapter 22, verse 30. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar placed Zedekiah on the throne at Jerusalem. He was a son of the dead king Josiah, and his mother was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah. 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 18. Like his predecessors, Zedekiah sought an opportunity to throw off the Babylonian yoke, despite prophetic warnings against such action. Egyptian naval activities along the coast of Phoenicia, including some landing assaults in 591 BC, induced Zedekiah to develop an alliance with Pharaoh. Once more, the house of Judah prepared for war, and in 588 BC, Nebuchadnezzar responded. The Babylonian forces besieged Jerusalem and attacked the cities of Judah. No doubt Zedekiah and his princes encouraged the Judeans to fight, but the prophet Jeremiah urged the people to surrender, saying that they would live while those who fight would die. Jeremiah chapter 38, verses 1 through 3. The princes accused the prophet of sedition. We read, "Therefore the princes said unto the king, We beseech thee, let this man be put to death. For thus he weakened the hands of the men of war that remain in this city, and the hands of all the people, in speaking such words unto them." Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 4. The famous Lakeish Letters, 21 ostraca found in A.D. 1935 through 1938, provide insight into the danger the Judeans faced when Jeremiah issued his warnings. In Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7, Lakeish is mentioned as one of the last cities of Judah still fighting while Jerusalem was besieged. Ostracan 6 of the letters raises a complaint about some unwelcomed messages being spread throughout the city by certain officials who weakened the hands of the people. This was the same charge leveled against Jeremiah. Perhaps his message of capitulation spread beyond Jerusalem to Lakeish. In any event, Zedekiah allowed the princes to dump Jeremiah into a dungeon for weakening the hands of all the people. The prophet would have died in a matter of days if not for the efforts of an Ethiopian eunuch. This brave man held the title Ebed-melech, meaning servant of the king. He convinced the king to bring Jeremiah out of the vile pit and into the court of the prison, where the prophet could at least have some food. Jeremiah chapter 38, verses 7 through 13. We can speculate that as a eunuch he had access to Zedekiah's harem. Perhaps the women of the harem, especially Zedekiah's daughters, encouraged Ebed-melech to act on their great-grandfather's behalf. Just because the princes advocated Jeremiah's death, there is no reason to believe the princesses held the same view. Ebed-melech rescued the prophet, and the Lord promised him deliverance in the upcoming fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah chapter 39, verse 17. Jeremiah's scribe Baruch also received a promise of survival. Jeremiah chapter 45, verse 5. He and the eunuch would not die when the Babylonians conquered the city, nor would they be led into captivity. Instead, they would become part of Jeremiah's remnant. We read, "The Lord said, Verily it shall be well with thy remnant. Verily I will cause the enemy to entreat thee well in the time of evil and in the time of affliction." Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 11. During the siege of Jerusalem, Pharaoh Hophra, 588 through 570 BC, led an army into Palestine to help his friends in the house of Judah. Hophra, also known as Apries, failed to defeat the Babylonians and was probably driven back to Egypt, as mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 37, verse 7. The city of Lakeish fell in 587 BC, and with no more help coming over the horizon, the final destruction of Jerusalem occurred on August 14th through 17th, 586 BC. King Zedekiah fled with his remaining troops, but the Babylonian army captured him and brought him to Nebuchadnezzar's headquarters at Riblah in Syria. There, Nebuchadnezzar enjoyed the sweet taste of revenge as he passed judgment upon his former vassal. We read, Then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah. Moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with chains to carry him to Babylon. Jeremiah chapter 39, verses 6 through 7. In Nebuchadnezzar's view, the dynasty of King David and Solomon was finished. All the princes were killed, and Zedekiah would die in a Babylonian prison. Jeremiah chapter 52, verse 11. The palace was burned along with all the homes. The temple was destroyed, and the city's walls were knocked down. All the people of means were led away as slaves. Only the poor were left in the land. Jeremiah chapters 39 and 52. But if Zedekiah was the last ruler in this Davidic line, then God's promise of a perpetual dynasty is a lie. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. The prophet Ezekiel presents certain clues that show the Davidic throne will indeed continue. Ezekiel was one of the captives. He was probably deported with the group taken to Babylon in 597 BC. He gave the following prophecy about King Zedekiah. We read, "And thou, profane, wicked prince of Israel, whose day is come, when iniquity shall have an end, thus saith the Lord God, remove the diadem, and take off the crown. This shall not be the same. Exalt him that is low, and abase him that is high." Ezekiel chapter 21, verses 25 through 26. Ezekiel's phrase, "exalt him that is low, and abase him that is high," refers to Judah's royal twins Zerah and Pharoahs. The Zerahites reigned over the Israelites while they were in Egypt. Then, prior to the Exodus, the Zerah branch fled in the ships of Dan to establish the city-states of Greece and Troy, with colonies in Spain and Ireland. Thus, the Pharoahs branch, containing the kings from David to Zedekiah, became the high reigning line in Palestine. Zedekiah's downfall meant the time had come to exalt the low Zerahites back to the throne. Somehow both the Zerahites and the Davidic line will reign. Ezekiel goes on to say that the throne will be overturned 3 times. "I will overturn it, and it shall be no more. Overturned until the kingship is given to him whose right it is," meaning Christ. Ezekiel chapter 21, verse 27. Jeremiah's mission was to oversee the first change in power predicted by Ezekiel. This mission is outlined in the first divine message Jeremiah received in 627 BC. We read, "See, I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, and to destroy, and to throw down, to build and to plant." Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 10. The nations he was placed over were the house of Israel, the lost tribes, and the house of Judah. In Jeremiah's day, Celtic members of the lost tribes began their journey to Western Europe and the British Isles. Theologians agree that Jeremiah fulfilled the rooting out, pulling down, destroying, and throwing down portion of his mission by prophesying over the fall of the house of Judah. No doubt his message of surrender did weaken the hands of the people, as the princes accused him of doing. The second part of his mission, to build and to plant, would lead Jeremiah on a journey to deliver the never-ending Davidic line to the Zerah branch. A member of King David's lineage through Solomon had to be planted among the Zerahites. More details about this first overturn of the throne emerge in a riddle given to the house of Israel, Ezekiel 17. The riddle depicts Nebuchadnezzar as a great eagle coming to take King Jehoiakim and his princes to Babylon. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 3 and 4 and 12. Jehoiakim is described as the highest branch of the cedar. His princes are called young twigs. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 3 and 4. Nebuchadnezzar then places Zedekiah on the throne, but Zedekiah, described as a willow tree, seeks an alliance with a second great eagle, meaning Pharaoh. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 5 through 7 and 13 through 15. The alliance proves useless, and Zedekiah is uprooted and taken to Babylon to die. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 9 through 10 and 16 through 20. The riddle then says, "Thus saith the Lord God, I will also take of the highest branch of the high cedar, and will set it. I will crop off from the top of his young twigs a tender one, and will plant it upon a high mountain and eminent. In the mountain of the height of Israel will I plant it, and it shall bring forth boughs, and bear fruit, and be a goodly cedar, and under it shall dwell all fowl of every wing. In the shadow of the branches thereof shall they dwell. And all the trees of the field shall know that I, the Lord, have brought down the high tree, and have exalted the low tree. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 22 through 24. In keeping with the riddle's imagery, it is clear that the Lord intends to plant a member of Zedekiah's lineage among the mass, or mountain, of the lost tribes of Israel. Jeremiah's mission required him to serve as God's implement for carrying out this planting. The person to be planted must come from the top of his young twigs, meaning Zedekiah's royal sons. However, this person will be a tender one, implying a princess. It is interesting to note that grammatically the expression young twigs is in the feminine form. We have learned that all of Zedekiah's sons were killed by Nebuchadnezzar, but his daughters survived. Therefore, at least one of the royal princesses, representing David's line of the Pharoahs branch, must marry into the Zerah branch to exalt and raise them to power. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Babylonians freed Jeremiah, granting him leave to go in safety. Jeremiah chapter 40, verses 4 and 5. He went to Mizpah, where a man named Gedaliah served as the military governor on behalf of Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah chapter 40, verse 6. Eventually, the remaining Judean soldiers, guerrilla forces operating in the outlying areas, heard news of Gedaliah's installation as governor. Their commanding officers brought them to Mizpah, and soon a power struggle developed between two captains, Ishmael and Johanan. According to Jeremiah chapter 41, Ishmael assassinated Gedaliah and all the Babylonian soldiers that were left behind at Mizpah. He then took the Jews, or Judeans, even the king's daughters, and headed east for Ammon. Jeremiah chapter 41, verse 10. But Johanan's forces caught up with them and rescued the captives. Among those rescued were Jeremiah, Zedekiah's daughters, Baruch the scribe, and the eunuchs such as Ebed-melech. Jeremiah chapter 41, verse 16. Johanan feared Nebuchadnezzar would seek revenge on them because Ishmael killed his governor and soldiers. Since Pharaoh had been allied with Zedekiah and the Judeans, Johanan decided they should flee to Egypt. The Bible records that he took men, women, children, and the king's daughters, and every person that the Babylonians left with Gedaliah, including Jeremiah and Baruch, to Tapenese, in the land of Egypt. Jeremiah chapter 43, verse 6 and 7. If we believe the hordes of misinformed theologians, then Jeremiah and his remnant died at Tapenese when Nebuchadnezzar invaded Egypt in 568 and 567 BC. They say King David's perpetual dynasty ceased. The prophet failed to plant and build. Did David's line end on Egyptian soil? Did God's promises fail? We will look at Tapenese, plus ancient Irish histories, to see if Jeremiah completed his mission. Tapenese served as a mercenary fortress at the eastern gate of Egypt. According to the 5th century BC historian Herodotus, Pharaoh Psamtik I, circa 663 through 610 BC, granted the site to Greek sea raiders from Ionia and Caria. Bad weather had forced the Grecian ships to land on Egypt's coast at the precise moment in history when Psamtik needed a mercenary army to consolidate his power. In exchange for their help, the Ionians and Carians also received permission to settle at Naucratis. Naucratis is located west of Pharaoh's capital in Sais. The most important Ionian city in Caria was Miletus. The Greek mercenaries serving in Egypt probably sailed from this port. They were known as Milesians. The term militia is derived from them. Beginning in about 700 BC, the Milesians extended their power throughout the Mediterranean. Eventually, they founded 90 colonies, and along with other Ionians, such as Euboean seafarers from cities like Chalcis, their trading posts and bases controlled vast areas. They established themselves at Tarsus and Almina in the eastern Mediterranean, and at Sinope, Amisus, Trapezus, Phasis, Panticapaeum, Olbia, Istris, and Tomis on the Black Sea. In the western Mediterranean, the Ionians founded Messana on Sicily, Cumae, another site named Olbia on Sardinia, Alalia on Corsica, Massilia, which became the French port of Marseille, and Emporia on the Hebrew or Iberian peninsula of Spain. What is the background of the Ionians, the Milesians at Tapenese? In his history of the Peloponnesian War, the Greek historian Thucydides, circa 460 through 400 BC, says that Ionia was colonized by the Athenians. Herodotus places Miletus in Carian territory and says it was taken by those who set out from the government house in Athens and believed themselves to be of the purest Ionian blood. Therefore, the Milesians were Athenians. They had family ties to the ruling class at Athens. It is interesting to note that when Persians defeated Miletus in 494 BC, the loss was deeply felt by the citizens of Athens. According to Herodotus, a man named Phrynichus went on to produce a play called The Capture of Miletus, which caused his Athenian audience to burst into tears. Phrynichus was fined 1,000 drachmas for reminding them of the disaster suffered by their kinsmen, and his play was forbidden to ever be staged again. It is believed that Athenians sailed to Anatolia and gained control of Miletus around 1000 BC. In Volume 1, we learned that the Athenians were originally colonists from Sais in Egypt, led by Calchol, a member of the Zerah branch of Judah. Therefore, the Milesians were Zerahites. The symbol of Judah is the lion, and note that the most important harbor at Miletus was the Lion Harbor, so named for the stone lions that guarded it. Ionians are credited as the first Greeks to produce coinage. Beginning in about 610 BC, the heraldic lion of Judah and a star appear on the Milesian coins. These symbols continued from the time of Jeremiah until the Romans replaced them. The star reminds us of Balaam's prophecy on the kingship of Israel. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. This royal star is Christ, the long-awaited Son of Righteousness, mentioned in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. According to Diodorus Siculus, Greek historian circa 80 through 20 BC, Pharaoh Psamtik I trusted the Greek mercenaries more than his Egyptian forces. In his Library of History, Book 1, Diodorus says that an Egyptian army of over 200,000 men revolted when Psamtik assigned the Milesians the more honorable position of his right wing in battle. The defiant Egyptian soldiers departed for Ethiopia, where they carved out a new homeland for themselves. Although Psamtik regretted the loss of his army, it did not stop him from allowing in more of the foreigners. He went on to form alliances with Athens and other Greek states. During Pharaoh Hophra's reign, Johanan and his Judean guerrillas brought Jeremiah and his remnant to the Milesian fortress at Tapenese. Faced with the Babylonian threat of invasion, Johanan's soldiers would have been a welcome addition to bolster the strength of the garrison. Zedekiah's daughters, the royal princesses, would have stayed in the stronghold's state apartments as honored guests and allies of Pharaoh. Civil war broke out at the end of Hophra's reign when Egyptian soldiers from a failed campaign in North Africa revolted. According to Diodorus, Hophra sent a man named Amasis to negotiate a settlement with his renegade army. But Amasis joined the revolt and was made their king. Soon all the native Egyptians sided with Amasis. Hophra was forced to flee to his mercenaries, who numbered about 30,000 men. According to Herodotus, Book 2, the Milesians fought well in the battle that followed, but they were greatly outnumbered and Hophra was captured alive. Amasis became pharaoh, 569 through 527 BC, and at a later date Hophra was strangled aboard a boat in the Nile. The surviving mercenaries lost their influence in Egypt, and as a result of this civil war, Nebuchadnezzar took the opportunity to conquer Tapenese and invade the country. While the Bible ends its record with Zedekiah's daughters and Jeremiah at Tapenese, Irish annals pick up their trail. The people of Ireland handed down their history in songs, poems, and entertaining tales and legends. Historical figures were endowed with magical powers, and actual events were embellished by Celtic bards and Senachis, or historians. When Christianity arrived, monks compiled the stories into rare manuscripts. The clerics added their own spin to the tales as they tried to place them into biblical periods. For example, Hophra, Pharaoh Singris to the Irish, who was strangled on a boat in the Nile, became the Pharaoh of the Exodus who died in the Red Sea, and Amasis, the winner of the civil war against Hophra, was made into the victorious Moses because of the similarity of their names. So when Irish legends speak of Moses meeting with Milesians, experts know the true time setting for the event is in the days of Jeremiah. Irish records list 5 invasions of their island before the birth of Christ. All of the invaders had ties to Greece. They were primarily comprised of members from the Zerah branch of Judah and the Hebrew Danites. See Volume 1. The 4th invasion consisted of Greek Hebrews called Danaans, known in Ireland as the Tuatha De Danaan, or Tribe of Dan. The 5th invasion was by the Milesian Zerahites, whose colonies spread from the Black Sea to Spain. When the Milesians acquired dominance over their brother Israelites from the tribe of Dan, many Danites retreated to Ireland's woods and caves, giving rise to fabulous tales that connect them with mystery and magic. But other members of the Tuatha De Danaan used their skills in the service of the Milesian kings. Diodorus in Book 2 says that the Greeks, especially the Athenians, were well liked by the people of Ireland. Irish legends offer a similar view. For example, the great historian Geoffrey Keating, A.D. 1570 through 1646, learned from ancient records that the Tuatha De Danaan had once helped Athens in war. According to the legend, they employed their magic to put life back into the bodies of slain Athenians. Fanciful tales such as this contain underlying truths. They add weight to the records that tell us all the pre-Christian conquerors of Ireland originated from Greece. Indeed, it is even said that Calcol, or Cecrops, the Zerahite founder of Athens, planted his dynasty in Ulster. Evidence overwhelmingly declares that the Irish are Israelites, and the Milesian sea raiders at Tapenese were members of the Zerah branch of Judah through their Athenian bloodlines. When archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie dug at Tapenese in A.D. 1886, he learned that the fortress mound was still called Qasar bint el-Yehudi, meaning the palace of the Jew's daughter. Jeremiah's journey, the prophet's mission, would see him plant this daughter of Zedekiah among the Milesian Zerahites. The Bible says Zedekiah had more than one daughter. Jeremiah chapter 43 verse 6. The Annals of Ireland name 2, Princess Tea Tephi and Princess Scota. Gleaning through the legends, J.A. Goodchild began publishing the story of Tea Tephi in A.D. 1886. This was the same year Sir Petrie dug at Tapenese. Goodchild's work is in the form of a long poem, about 3,000 lines, titled The Book of Tephi. The poem's opening lines have Tea declaring her lineage. Tephi, born in the house of the High Ones, or Princes of Zion. Zion, loved of the Lord, home of the house of our God. Daughter of David, shepherd in Judah, tribe of the Lion. Queen over Bethel and Dan, where they be scattered abroad. The poem records the journey of Tea Tephi, Jeremiah, and Baruch from the house of Judah to the Isles of the West. The Isles are known as a home for the remnant from the tribe of Dan. The group left Tapenese and the Nile Delta aboard a ship from Tarshish. The ship's pilot was a Danite. Tarshish, located at the bottom of the Hebrew Peninsula, is usually associated with Phoenician merchants, but the sailing tribe of Dan often had intermingled lives with the Phoenicians. See 2 Chronicles chapter 2 verse 14. It took about 3 weeks of sailing for Jeremiah and his remnant to reach Carthage. The Carthaginians were originally Phoenician colonists. Due to their pagan worship of Baal, the prophet predicted their total destruction by the Romans. A Roman army did in fact destroy the city during the Third Punic War in 146 BC. When they left Carthage, a violent storm blew their vessel northward for a week. It brought them to a little bay near Rome. The legend records an encounter with a chieftain of the Julia clan, and the prophet offered him a glimpse into the rise and fall of Rome. It is interesting to note that the Julia gens claimed descent from the Trojan prince Aeneas through his son Iulus, often known as Ascanius. In about 129 BC, the Julian family minted coins relating their origin to the Trojans, and around 100 BC, their most famous member, Julius Caesar, was born. The poet Virgil, 70 through 19 BC, records Caesar's lineage to Troy in his epic, the Aeneid. Jeremiah could have planted Tea Tephi with the Julia clan, for in Volume 1 of this study we learned that the Trojans were descended from the Zerah branch of Judah. Instead, he would plant her with the Milesian Zerahites, whose royal blood eventually joined the British line of Trojans. See Volume 1 on Brutus. He was the first British king and another descendant of Aeneas and Ascanius. Jeremiah and his remnant left the coast near Rome and sailed between 2 mighty islands, The poem is referring to the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. Ionians settled on both of these islands. According to Herodotus, Book 1, when the Persians came to Anatolia, a man named Bias suggested that all of Ionia unite and sail for Sardinia. His plan was never carried out because Thales of Miletus urged everyone to stay in conquered Ionia. Sardinia retains elements of Zara and Dan in its name, Zardinia. Sailing beyond the two islands, they drew near to the land of Eber. Their ship followed the coastline southward until it reached Cair Melkarth by the sea gate. The land of Eber is Iberia, meaning the Hebrew peninsula of Spain and Portugal. Perhaps the prophet and his remnant first caught sight of land in the vicinity of the mouth of the Ebro. The Ebro River, signifying the Hebrew River, leads inland to Zaragoza. Zaragoza, or Zaragaza, means Zara's stronghold. Israelites from the tribes of Gad and Simeon are listed among the people living at Cair Melkarth by the Rock of Gibraltar. They gave the prophet a warm welcome, and the people chanted Princess Tia's name, Tia, Tia, Tia. According to the poem, Jeremiah prophesied that one day their rock would belong to a damsel holding a trident. This refers to Britain's control of the sea gate from their crown colony at Gibraltar. The famous cartwheel coinage of King George III, A.D. 1760 through 1820, shows Britannia holding her trident. In honor of Princess Tia, the city's name was changed from Cair Melkarth to Cair Tia, which in time became Cartia. They stayed at Cartia for 5 months. The Phoenician ship that brought them departed for Tyre, its crew upset that the god Melkarth was no longer honored in this city of Tia. During their stay, Baruch the scribe is said to have died, and on the day he was buried, a boy was born to their host. In memory of Baruch, they called the baby Simon Breach. A Danite pirate provided a captured ship for Jeremiah and his remnant, and they departed Cartia. Using only the sail, they left the Mediterranean and made their way to Tarshish. A Milesian king named Ith controlled this area. Nearby is the port of Gadir, which became known as Gadis, then Cadiz. Ith greeted them with kindness. He loaded their ship with wonderful presents for Tia, and he gave them a crew of oarsmen. With the help of the Milesian king, they sailed around the Hebrew peninsula and past its cap, or top. On this voyage another storm hit, breaking their steering pole, but with divine help they caught sight of the beard of the land of Tin, meaning Cornwall. They sailed behind the jagged coast to a safe haven called the Storehouse of Ith, which is probably a reference to St. Ives Bay. They spent 5 weeks among the tin miners of Cornwall, while the prophet sent word to Ireland that their next queen had arrived. He sent the Irish a scroll that condemned their Baal worship and outlined his mission to plant David's seed among them. Jeremiah's message introduced Tia as the daughter of David, the daughter of Pharaoh, and the daughter of Ith. The histories of Ireland often refer to their queen as Pharaoh's daughter, linked to the king of Spain. Some scholars suspect that Pharaoh Hophra adopted Zedekiah's daughters in order to further his claim on Palestine. Egyptian records report several royal adoptions during this period. One of Ireland's rulers was a man named Eochaid Heremon. Eochaid is Irish for the Greek name Achaeos, and the term Heremon is a title meaning chief of the landsmen, a king. He was a Milesian living among the Tuatha De Danaan. Heremon was related to the king of Spain. His genealogy traces back to Calcol, the Zerahite founder of Athens, who is said to have planted a royal dynasty in Ulster. See Volume 1. Heremon and other leaders in Ireland sent a wealth of presents to Tia, inviting her to come to them. The Milesians at Cornwall gathered a convoy of ships to accompany Tia. A total of 2,005 people were in the fleet. According to the poem, they sailed north, passing the coast of modern-day Wales until they reached a small island. They spent the night there before completing the journey across to Ireland. The poem says that the ships bringing Jeremiah and the sacred things of the temple, which included the Ark of the Covenant, left the fleet before it reached Ireland. Some tales say a storm scattered the invasion fleet. Jeremiah was last seen heading west as the convoy was about to pass the coast of Gwent. Tea Tephi arrived in time to watch the Irish chieftains select a king. Each leader placed his seat at the edge of a circle, into which entered the priest with Baal's bow to shoot an arrow skyward. They wanted the pagan god to direct the arrow back down to the chieftain's seat he wished to make king, but all attempts failed until Samson's bow was used. The arrow it shot landed on Tia's seat known as Jacob's Pillar. See Volume 1 on Jacob's Pillar. This confirmed that she should be queen, and when a second arrow from Samson's bow landed on Eochaid-Haramon's seat, he became the Ard Rai, or High King. Samson had been the long-haired biblical judge from the tribe of Dan, circa 1070 BC. It is interesting to note that the Irish claim the Tuatha Dé Danann preserved his bow for 5 centuries. In Ireland, Jacob's Pillar became known as Lia Fail, meaning the Stone of Fate. All the high kings received their throne while standing upon this stone of destiny. A tale called the Champion's Ecstasy says that when Conn the 100-fighter stood on the stone, it screamed so that it was heard all of Tara. The number of times it screamed equaled the number of kings that would come from Conn's lineage. One account says Lia Fail arrived in Ireland with the Tuatha Dé Danann after they helped the Athenians in a war. In Tia's poem, a Danite piloted the ship that brought her and the stone from Egypt. In The Story of the Irish Race, page 54, author Seamus McManus comments on the knowledge acquired by the great Gaelic scholar and translator of Old Irish manuscripts, Eugene O'Curry, AD 1796 through 1862. We read, O'Curry says it was under or after Erimon, the first Milesian high king, that one of the 3 pleasantest hills in Ireland, came to be named Tara, a corruption of the genitive form of the compound word Tia Mur, meaning the burial place of Tia, the wife of Erimon, the daughter of a king of Spain. In the Annals of Clonmacnoise, from the creation to AD 1408, translated into English by Conall Mageeganan in AD 1627, more information is told on the naming of Tara. We read, Soon after this conquest made by the sons of Miletus, their kinsmen and friends, they divided the whole kingdom among themselves. But first, before they landed in this land, Tia, the daughter of Lotus, that was wife of Haramon, desired one request of her husband and kinsmen, that the place she would most like of in the kingdom should be for ever after called after or by her name, which is since that time called Tereg, where the king's palace stood for many years after, and which she caused to be called Tia Mur. Mur in Irish is a town or palace in English, and being joined to Tia maketh it to be the town, palace, and house of Tia. According to J. H. Allen's book, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright, page 254, the chief bard to King Dermod, 6th century AD, tells a similar story on the naming of Tara. We read, A rampart was raised around her house, for Tia, the daughter of Lugaid. She was buried outside in her mound, and from her it was named Tia Mur. Allen notes that the name Lugaid represents a title, for in the Irish language, Lug means God, and Aid means house. Therefore, Tea Tephi was known as the daughter of God's house. Her title obviously refers to the stone Lia Fail, or Jacob's Pillar. For when Jacob anointed this stone, he called it Bethel, meaning God's house. Genesis chapter 28, verses 16 through 22. When archaeologists dug into the hill at Tara, they discovered Egyptian faience beads dating to the 1st millennium BC. We will never know for certain if the beads belong to Tia. However, they do provide an example of the Irish and Egyptian link via the Milesians. The Irish maintain that King David's harp was among the items Tia brought to their island. This soothing heirloom became their national emblem, as opposed to the symbols of might found on many flags. In his book titled Dialogo della Musica Antica, AD 1581, author Vincenzio Galilei, father of the famous astronomer Galileo, offers the following comments on the Irish harp. We read, This most ancient instrument, commemorated by Dante, was brought to us from Ireland, where such are most excellently worked, and they paint and engrave it on their public and private buildings and on their hill, stating as their reason for so doing that they have descended from the royal prophet David. When Tia married the Milesian High King of Ireland, the breach between the Zerah and Pharoahs branches of Judah began to mend. The breach occurred back when Tamar gave birth to Judah's royal twins. In Genesis chapter 38, verses 27 through 30, a scarlet thread was tied to Zerah's hand as it came out of Tamar's womb, signifying that he was the firstborn heir. But his hand returned to the womb, and Pharoahs was born, followed by Zerah. As we have learned, the Zerahites ruled in Egypt prior to the Exodus. After they fled to Greece and elsewhere, the Pharoahs branch rose to power. Jeremiah delivered Tea the Pharisite to Haramon the Zerahite, thus uniting the royal branches. It is fitting that Tea's offspring healed the ancient breach, for her Hebrew name was Tamar. The term Tephi means little one. The genealogy of the Milesians, taken from the Chronicles of Ireland, lists several members who belong to the red or scarlet branch. MacManus says that at the time of Christ they reigned over Ulster as the famed Knights of the Royal Branch, now more commonly known as the Knights of the Red Branch, page 23. They called themselves the Crowned. The Ulster coat of arms that is still used in Northern Ireland today is an intriguing emblem consisting of a red hand centered upon a six-pointed star. The star is centered on a red cross with a crown near the top. Heraldic devices represent ancient claims, historical events, and acts of bravery that proudly proclaim with visual images a family's heritage. The symbols on the Ulster coat of arms declare the unity of Judah's twins. The red hand identifies them with Zerah, whose hand was tied with a scarlet thread. The six-pointed star, known as the Mogan David, or Shield of David, or the Star of David, identifies them with the Davidic line of Pharoahites. The crown is an identifying mark of Judah's royalty. And last, what seems like a red cross could in fact be the scarlet thread that ties the red hand at the wrist. Imagine looking down at the top of a box, a present that is tied with a scarlet ribbon, in which case the ribbon would appear as a red cross. Let us now examine the stories dealing with Zedekiah's other daughter, Princess Scota. MacManus offers a clear overview of the legends involving Scota, the Milesians, and Ireland called Innisfail, Isle of Destiny. We read from page 8. They came first out of that vast undefined tract called Scythia. They came to Ireland through Egypt, Crete, and Spain. They were called Gaedal because their remote ancestor in the days of Moses was Gaedal Glas. When a child, Moses is said to have cured him of the bite of a serpent, and to have promised then that no serpent or other poisonous thing should infest the happy western island that his far posterity would one day inhabit. Niall, a grandson of Gaedal, who had been invited as an instructor into Egypt by one of the pharaohs, married Pharaoh's daughter Scota, after whom Ireland was, in later ages, called Scotia. In Egypt, Niall and his people grew rich and powerful, resented the injustice of a later pharaoh, were driven from the land, and after long and varied wanderings during succeeding ages, reached Spain. When, after they had long sojourned in Spain, they heard of Ireland, and took it to be the Isle of Destiny, foretold for them by Moses, their leader was Miled, or Milesius, whose wife also was a pharaoh's daughter, and named Scota. Miled's uncle, Ith, was first sent into Ireland to bring them report upon it. MacManus based his overview on Keating's work, The History of Ireland from the Earliest Period to the English Invasion. While Keating mentions two princesses named Scota, one around the time of Moses in the 15th century BC, and another with a Gallam called Miled, scholars believe there was only one historical Scota. They deduce this from Keating's own words, for he says that the Scota at the time of Moses was the daughter of Pharaoh Singras, but the pharaoh whose daughter was married to Miled was the 15th pharaoh after him, and he was styled Pharaoh Nectanebus. King Nectanebus reigned from 380 to 363 BC. This was long after the days of Milesian might and far from the time of Moses. However, Nectanebus was the 15th pharaoh from the reigns of Amasis and Pharaoh Hophra, according to the historian Africanus. Therefore, Pharaoh Singras in the Irish record is Hophra, and we can eliminate any reference to Moses. All the events occurred in one Scota's lifetime, when she and the Milesians were at Tapenese, and the Milesian invasion of Ireland occurred at the height of their power, in the days of Jeremiah. It is said that Princess Scota married Niall in Egypt. Niall, Neil, and Neil, with an E, are well-known names in Ireland. One powerful family is called Neil, or O'Neill, sons of Niall. Perhaps the name derives from the most famous Nile of all, the Nile River, where Milesians were garrisoned. Since he is later called Gallam the Milesian, perhaps Nile was used as a title linking him to the Nile Delta. Note, however, that Milesians were also familiar with the name, for Herodotus credits a man named Neleus with the founding of Miletus, Book 9. The Irish say that Niall was invited to Egypt by one pharaoh, then he and his people were driven out by another. This brings to mind the Milesian mercenaries who fought for Pharaoh Hophra. Amasis had them withdrawn from their forts after he defeated Hophra. Irish legends also tell us that Niall and his people were associated with Scythia before they traveled to Spain. This is yet another reference to the Milesians, for it is said that they had over 60 colonies established along the Black Sea, with places like Panticapaeum located in Scythian territory. In Volume 2 we learn that the lost tribes of Israel occupied the northern shores of the Black Sea during the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Cimmerian Hebrews took the northwest coast by Arsareth, and Scythian Hebrews crossed the Caucasus to gain control of the northeast coast. A Milesian departure from the area would seem to coincide with the arrival of these lost tribes, especially when Scythians flowed, or forced their way, into the region around 612 through 590 BC. The earliest Scythian tomb at Calermis dates to about 580 BC, in the days of Jeremiah and Niall. Let us now examine the stories in which Scota's husband is called Gallam the Milesian, king of Spain, Gallam, Gallam, etc., the Miled of Spain. According to the Liber Gabala, Book of Invasions, Gallam grew up in Spain and then traveled to Scythia in order to visit his kinsmen. There he married the daughter of the king. Gallam's wife bore 2 sons during his stay in Scythia. The firstborn was called Eber-Dawn. The name Eber brings to mind Iberia, meaning Hebrew, and Don is a name that can be linked to the Scythian rivers Don and Donets. In time, Gallam and his sons were driven from Scythia. This occurred, as previously mentioned, during the period when Scythian members of the lost tribes began traversing the Caucasus to occupy the northeast region of the Black Sea. Forced out of Scythia, Gallam the Milesian eventually sailed for Egypt with a fleet of 40 ships. According to the Irish, he married Pharaoh's daughter Scota, who gave birth to 2 sons, Emer the White and Amergin. One line of scholarship believes Scota was really Zedekiah's daughter. Hophra adopted her when she came to the Milesian fortress at Tapenese. After Gallam acquired Princess Scota, he sailed his fleet from Egypt to Spain. Legends say they reached many parts of the world, and during their voyage Scota gave birth to more sons. The most plausible stopovers mentioned in the records include the island of Crete, with its Mount Judah, or Mount Ida, and Sicily, with its Ionian colony at Messana, or modern-day Messina. When they sailed from Sicily, it is believed they reached the Spanish region of Valencia. Then, their 40 ships took them around the coast of Spain to a landing at Galicia. The province Galicia may derive its name from Gallam. According to Keating, some historians report that Gallam was the king of Biscay. This indicates that he and the Milesians controlled all the northern regions, from Galicia to Biscay. In Spain, Scota gave birth to her husband's last 2 sons, Harimon and Haranan. Gallam died in Spain, after which Scota and the sons headed for Ireland. Some historians say their Milesian invasion fleet sailed from Galicia, others believe they left from Biscay. During the voyage, a storm worked havoc on the fleet, destroying all but 3 of Gallam's sons. It is said that the Tuatha De Danann used magic to create the storm. The survivors were able to make 2 landings in Ireland, one in the south and the other up north. Scota died in the fighting down south, while Harimon's forces gained a foothold in the north. Eventually, the 2 Milesian armies came together in a final battle against the tribe of Dan, and the Milesians won control of the Isle of Destiny. The stories involving Tea Tephi declare that she became the wife of Harimon, the first Milesian High King of Ireland. This implies that Tea married her sister's son. Scota and Tea may have been half-sisters, for the kings of Judah did not limit themselves to one wife. While the Liber Gabala indicates Scota gave birth to Harimon, the Annals of Clonmacnoise give a different account. This record says that Gallam, or Gallo, was thrice married, first in Scythia to Sang-Rifler, his daughter, a great prince in Scythia, by whom he had 2 sons, called Don and Herigfiera; secondly to Scota Pharaoh's daughter, by whom he had also 4 sons born unto him in Egypt, Heber the White, Avergin, Ire, and Culp; thirdly to Savia, the daughter of Nicephorus, then the chiefest of Spain, by whom he had likewise 2 sons which were born in Spain, called Harimon and Haranan. When Princess Tea married Harimon, she joined the highest rank of Milesian royalty. The Irish tell us that Haramon's father was the king of Biscay, and his mother was either Princess Scota or the daughter of the chiefest king of Spain. In honor of Scota, the Milesian invaders became known as Scots. Ireland was called Scotia. 1,000 years later, their descendants acquired the northern part of Britain, and they called the territory Scotia Minor. Gradually, the term Scotia Minor was replaced in written records with the name we use today, Scotland. Some experts believe Jeremiah appears in the Irish histories under such names Jaruanel, Jarbanel, Earbanel the prophet, and Er from Judea. The Annals of Clonmacnoise confuse Er from Judea with Aaron, the high priest of the Jews. He is linked to the fall of Jerusalem in the days of Gallam the Milesian. This occurred during the time of Jeremiah the prophet, and not in the Exodus with Moses and Aaron. Also note that Aaron was never high priest of the Jews, for that title is another link to the kingdom and house of Judah. 2 places in the world claim to have been Jeremiah's tomb, and both are in Ireland. The first burial site is on Devonish Island in Lough Erne. It is located about 4 miles south of Enniskillen in Northern Ireland, and it consists of an old grave cut out of rock. In his book titled Britain's Royal Throne on page 57, Dr. Thomas Foster reports that many tutors at Enniskillen University believe the Devonish Island site was truly the prophet's tomb. This could account for the numerous Irish boys named Jeremiah, Jeremy, Jerry, etc. The second grave is known as the tomb of Allam Fadla, near Oldcastle in County Meath. Tara is located in this same county, and many believe that Allam Fadla was Jeremiah. Inside the grave is a curious stone with hieroglyphical carvings that depict the prow of a boat carrying 5 passengers and another boat with 4 passengers. In Howard Rand's book titled Study in Jeremiah, page 289 through 291, a suggestion is made that the 5 passengers are Jeremiah, Tea Tephi, Scota, Baruch, and Ebed-Melech. The boat with only 4 people shows that Scota left the group when she married Gallam in Egypt. The carvings also depict an eagle holding a twig. This obviously refers to Zedekiah's daughter, the tender twig in Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 22. Astronomical symbols on the stone record the group's arrival in Ireland on October 16, 583 BC, about 3 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Allam Fadla is called a Milesian king, a lawgiver, a doctor of wisdom, and a prophet or seer. The name is actually a title, for Fadla often signifies king, and Allam is a scholarly rank. It is interesting to note that the term Allam or Alev may derive from a Hebrew word used in reference to a seer and revealer, Gola. 2 centuries prior to Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, Allam Fadla founded the School of Learning in Ireland. This Mir Allam, School of the Prophets, brings to mind the college for seers at Jerusalem in the days of Jeremiah and King Josiah. 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verse 22. The fact that Jerusalem and Tara had similar schools provides further evidence linking Jeremiah to the Emerald Isle. Allam Fadla receives credit for instituting the Great Triennial Parliament called the Face of Tara. This important gathering, along with other fairs, had counterparts in the form of the 3 yearly feasts requiring attendance of all males at Jerusalem: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. The laws of the land were formulated during these gatherings, and some suggest that the name Tara is linked to Torah, the Hebrew word for law. In one of their ancient laws, the Irish designate 6 places called brudines to serve as asylums of refuge for people who commit accidental homicide. These brudines were like the 6 cities of refuge authorized under the Mosaic Law. The law protected accidental manslayers in the Holy Land. See Numbers chapter 35, verses 9 through 13. Irish rules, whose only counterparts are found in the Hebrew legal code, point to Jeremiah, the great Allam Fadla lawgiver, as their source. Jeremiah completed his journey, his mission to uproot and plant King David's perpetual dynasty. The prophet Ezekiel predicted 3 removals, or overturns, of the Davidic throne before the Messiah receives it. Ezekiel chapter 21, verse 27. And as of today, this throne of destiny, which consists of Jacob's pillar, has been overturned thrice. Jeremiah brought it to Ireland, Prince Fergus received it in Scotland, and Edward I took it to England.
See Volume 1. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, a descendant of the Pharoahs and Zerah branches of Judah through the union of Tia and Haramon, is the current ruler of David's kingdom.